Boeing's problems with a 737 MAX now leading to cutbacks here in Wichita. Plus, could the solution to Kansas prison problems lie with a private prison system in another state? And a child's death in Wichita now revealed to be part of an ongoing DCF investigation. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. KSN News first confirmed this week that multiple agencies are investigating the death of 2-year-old Zayden Janez Kulua. Cake News was there when officers responded to calls last Friday night about a child not breathing at the Sunset Motel on Broadway. KSN says the police report shows Zayden Janez Kulua died before officers arrived. He was just days from his 3rd birthday. At the time, police told Cake News his death was a medical problem and that he had a pre-existing medical condition. Investigators now say they're waiting on toxicology results to confirm exactly how he died. The Department for Children and Families confirms it is investigating Zayden's death. In a written statement, DCF said the agency was prohibited from commenting on the case until Thursday when it became public knowledge, which triggered a provision in KSA 38-2212 that allows the agency to confirm its involvement. And joining me on the desk this week to discuss this and more, we have State Representative Tom Sawyer, Democrat from Wichita, and State Senator Susan Wagle, Republican from Wichita, and Daniel McCoy from the Wichita Business Journal. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so this is not the first time we have heard a story about a child who has passed under investigation by the DCF. We don't know in this case yet exactly if there was any sort of malfeasance. We're waiting on toxicology results. But what we do know is that there is great concern about the handling of cases. I mean, when we were talking about it before the show, your first comment was, I'd like to see no more kids dead.
Yeah, it is. This has been an ongoing problem. And the legislature this year, we did do a few things to begin to address the problem. We passed the Family First Act, which put some reforms in place. We put some additional funding for DCF, and we allow them now to hire 30 more social workers. So all those things should help some.
What are you hoping to see come out of, 30 more social workers? Is that enough? Is that just a start? Are we hoping to see some major changes, Susan?
Well, what we have in Kansas is a mental health problem that hasn't been addressed yet, a huge addiction problem. Meth is in Kansas. Our law enforcement's complaining about it. It's coming over the border. It's a very strong, pure drug. People get addicted immediately, and as soon as they're addicted, they're non-functional parents, and we've had this happen over and over again. So we need a multi-pronged approach. We need a DCF that's intervening, but we also need mental health support services for these families.
And certainly mental health is something that we've been hearing a lot about here in Sedgwick County over the last year or two. In fact, one of the stories we're going to be talking about later today discusses the drug addiction issues that you had talked about. Is there somewhere that we can go legislatively that can help push these forward, or are these changes that have to start at the local level?
Well, both. There has to be both, but at the legislative level we can help with funding. We did last year, if I remember right, we passed a bill that would allow the lottery to sell lottery tickets through vending machines, and all that money will be dedicated to help for mental health intervention. So as that money starts coming in, that will provide at least a funding source to provide more money for mental health resources.
We're looking at more regionalization of services too. We have a huge problem here in Sedgwick County. Our commissioners are looking at it, our law enforcement is looking at it, and we want to treat people locally. We think that that's better intervention and it's more successful intervention. So, but we need to earmark money for it, and we need to start following paths that are successful in other states.
Well, we're going to find out how some of this stuff works out over the next few months, and I'm sure we'll be back talking about these issues with DCF again in a few months as we start to see the results of that extra money. But there are many other things going on in Kansas right now, including issues with Spirit. Turning to Wichita's economic health, the Wichita Business Journal is reporting some Wichita workers at Spirit will soon be losing work thanks to Boeing's problems with the 737 MAX jets. Spirit will cut the work schedules of some salaried employees to 4 days a week and cut their paychecks an equivalent amount, according to the Wichita Business Journal. The Journal reports this is part of a budget-cutting measure expected to last for the next 70 to 100 days. Since a second MAX jet crash in Ethiopia grounded the jets and halted production nationwide earlier this year, Spirit has continued to build the fuselages for the jets at a rate of 52 a month, even though Boeing had cut its production rate to 42 a month. And this after Spirit had made the hires and resource changes needed to increase its production rate this year. To date, the Business Journal says Spirit has not announced any local layoffs because of the MAX grounding. And those numbers all coming from the Wichita Business Journal, a story that you, Daniel, broke yesterday. New updates on Friday. Where are we standing with this situation right now?
Yeah, so today, Friday, Spirit basically confirmed what sources had told me on Thursday, and so they are some of their salaried employees, both union and non-union represented. They'll go to the equivalent of 32-hour work weeks, and the pay will be cut, as you said, concurrently along with that from later this month, June 21st through the end of August, basically through the end of August. This goes all the way up to the C-suite. The CEO, Tom Gentile, and senior leadership are all said to be doing this as well. It's about 6,000 people total, I'm told, between Wichita and Oklahoma. It's also impacting their Oklahoma facilities. Almost all of that's going to come from Wichita. They have about 12,500 workers here. So they're just trying to find new ways to cut costs because, as you mentioned, they were ready to go to 57 per month on the 737, mainly because of the MAX. They're still building some of the older version. It's called the next generation, but it's the older version of the plane. But it's not impacted by the grounding, but the MAX was going to be about 90% of deliveries for the 737 this year. So as Boeing is trying to work with regulators to get the MAX back in the air, Spirit's now trying to cut costs because all its assumptions had been that it would be at 57 by this summer, but at this point now.
Now, I know it's been more than a month, I think, since Boeing said that it had a fix that it was giving to the FAA. And that really is kind of what we're all waiting on with the groundings. Any signs of that coming into play yet?
That's the literally billion-dollar question in the industry right now. Boeing CFO updated some of that work this week. They are working with the FAA and other international regulators. He said they're just doing simulator tests with some of the enhanced software upgrades that they're bringing. But what they're doing a lot now, he says they're getting a lot of inquiries from regulators about the fix that they have, and so they're trying to address each and every one of those inquiries. Right now, we just don't know. The CEO of Boeing did say earlier this week he expected them back in the air at least by the end of the year, but that's quite a ways out. So there's still no definitive timetable, and you're right, that's kind of the tipping point for when we know kind of what happens with this situation long term.
Yeah, because I mean, companies like Spirit can only support this for so long before they're gonna have to start with some sort of more permanent solution.
Yeah, you figure perhaps furloughs for hourly workers are out there, and hopefully not, but you know, if it drug on too long or if sales were impacted long term because of this, you would expect to see layoffs as well.
Now, quick question for my lawmakers, and you may or may not know the answer on this, but I want to ask because I had some folks on Twitter asking me about unemployment during all of this. If they take the unemployment for that 1 day a week, is that something that's going to count against their lifelong limits on unemployment?
I don't know.
I didn't even know we had lifelong limits. We have we have limits for a specific incident. We don't have lifelong limits.
Okay.
And I'm not sure you can apply as long as you're employed and you're making four days of salary as opposed to 5. So as far as I know, we don't have lifelong limits.
Okay.
And especially in aircraft for our community, where we work and then we get laid off and then we go back to work again.
Yeah.
And I think each incident is treated separately.
Okay.
Yeah, the company's engineering union did say that they are working with the Labor Department on, I think it was up to $38 a week in unemployment benefits during this, and they're also talking about maybe some additional resources, where, for example, helping employees with their financial institutions, kind of working with their banks or their mortgage lender or whatever during this, what's going to be a 70-day period.
Well, As with so many things, it will take time for all of this to play out, and I'm sure we will keep on talking about it. Meanwhile, something they're talking about in Topeka, Kansas Republicans accusing the governor of breaking state law, with new plans announced this week to extend food aid to adults for longer. The fight is over how long adults who are not working will remain eligible for food benefits under the state's welfare laws. Under Governor Sam Brownback, the state cut eligibility times for welfare benefits in Kansas. Republicans say those cuts also legally prevent the governor from using federal exemptions to the federal rule that able-bodied adults without children can only get food aid for 3 months if they don't work at least 20 hours a week. Last month, DCF announced a plan to allow people not following the work requirements to get double the maximum 3 months of assistance, using some 58,000 exemptions Kansas has saved up. In a statement to the Wichita Eagle, DCF said the exemption would benefit youth aging out of foster care and homeless individuals. And at a time of low unemployment and with consideration to the economy and trade mitigation benefits, DCF felt this was a prudent policy change. The program is 100% federally funded. But this was still a highly controversial move, and I believe, if I remember correctly, Susan, I actually got a statement from your office on this as well.
Right, we're talking about able-bodied adults who can work. We aren't talking about the elderly. We aren't talking about pregnant women with children or families with children. We're talking about a specific group of people who can work, and there are signs out all over Kansas looking for people to hire. So clearly what we want to do is incentivize people to go to work when there's jobs out there, and if you're able to work. And that's why we've always limited the time that an able-bodied adult can be on food assistance. So I believe there's concern that she has violated the law, and we're going to look into that.
There's definitely some disagreement on that, though.
I don't think she's violated the law. I mean, there may be a disagreement on the policy, but the federal law allows you to take 15% of your caseloads of those able-bodied adults without dependents and give them exemption, give them more time, because the federal law realizes some people have a harder time finding jobs, or there's a health situation comes up, or family problems. Things come up. So they allow you to take 15%, and they give it to you in a number of months. So for example, in 2018, the state of Kansas got 8,000 months they got to bank to use for to give additional time to those people that are able-bodied adults without dependents. So that's perfectly permissible under federal law. The difference is back when under the Brownback administration, they didn't use those exemptions very much. We had them, but they didn't use them much. And the Kelly administration saying, yes, when people need some additional help or time, we should give it to them. The rub comes in, and I brought a copy of the law, is the HOPE Act, because in Kansas, we passed the HOPE Act. And what the HOPE Act says is the Secretary of DCF is prohibited from requesting or implementing a waiver or program from the U.S. Department of Agriculture for the time-limited assistance provisions for able-bodied adults. And then it goes on to say the time on food assistance for able-bodied adults shall be limited to 3 months in a 36-month period if, and this is the key part, if such adults are not meeting the requirements imposed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Well, they are meeting the requirements. The U.S. Department of Agriculture allows this 15% exemption. So to me, there isn't a problem with the law, but there may be some different interpretation of this law, but I do believe the Kelly administration is following the law because the federal government allows this 15% exemption, and that's what they're using.
Well,
it's
it's not the first law this session that has come into question over whether the governor can do this or that.
We had a discussion at the State Finance Council meeting on Senate Bill 328 that was passed that forbids Kansas from putting prisoners in private prisons, and we're sitting there as legislators having some disagreement whether it allows us to even on a temporary basis send them or not. I mean, it's hard to tell from the interpretation. We clearly can't set up private prisons in Kansas on a permanent basis, but there's some question whether we can even do it on a temporary basis.
So I guess the question is this another case where we go to the Attorney General and we ask for a ruling?
Well, first we research it legally with our own staff, and then we eventually do possibly take it to the Attorney General.
All right. It'll be interesting to hear what happens next. Talking about the whole prison issue, Kansas could partially solve its overcrowding problems by sending hundreds of prisoners to a controversial private prison in Arizona. The Department of Corrections this week asked state lawmakers for more money to house some 600 prisoners out of state. Senate Majority Leader Jim Denning revealed the negotiations with Core Civic in Arizona on Wednesday. The Wichita Eagle reports the company has a checkered history and faces lawsuits of inadequate staffing, poor service, and making false statements about its security operations. The State Finance Council gave the Department of Corrections more than $4 million extra dollars, which will pay to house about half as many inmates as the department wants to in other states or county jails. The Associated Press's John Hanna spoke with both sides after the decision.
How would you characterize, in terms of their actions, what the overall impact of not getting everything you asked for is?
I think it's going to make things more dangerous.
We were in that Band-Aid phase, and we put Band-Aids on everything.
And of course, we spoke in that piece just about one part of the funding that was passed. There was more that was talked about. I want to look first kind of at the business angle of this, Daniel. One of the biggest issues that they have is the understaffing, especially out at El Dorado Prison, where they've been running on emergency levels, 12 and 16-hour shifts. How long can an organization maintain that before you have people, I hate to say this, but rats fleeing a sinking ship?
Yeah, I mean, the stress has got to be enormous. I have a friend that's works at the sheriff's detention center downtown, and maybe not quite as bad as the staff cuts in El Dorado, but I know firsthand in talking with him that it's, you know, it weighs on everybody because it's stressful and there's no real relief in sight. So I think that's why you see a lot, and coming somewhat from the business community, in the case of Koch Industries here in Wichita, a lot coming from them on ways to try and cut recidivism and, you know, criminal justice reform overall to try and get, you know, as we were talking about, able-bodied adults that can work. Maybe they made a mistake somewhere along the line, but as a nonviolent offense, can we find a way to get them back to work? Because the best way to keep them from coming back in the system and relieve some of that pressure is a good, stable job and a connection to their community like that.
And as you brought up, Tom, some surprising moves bringing in the private prison in Arizona as a potential solution. Susan, you said you were very surprised by that announcement.
Yeah, we didn't know about that till a few minutes before the meeting. We did unanimously approve a very good pay raise for our workers in our prison, which is what we hope will help us keep our workers there and help us hire more people. Certainly we are very short of workers, but I was concerned not so much about the private prison angle as I was concerned about the fact that we don't have a Secretary of Corrections. And when the current secretary came to talk to me about the package, Roger, he said, I will be gone in 10 days. Then the governor gave us a new nominee for Secretary of Corrections who has a bad track record in the former state where he worked, where a judge said his testimony before a courtroom was disingenuous. He didn't come forth with records dealing with executions in the state. And I looked at his record and I go, I don't know how I can get this person confirmed in the Kansas Senate. And what we need is a Secretary of Corrections who can look at our long-term plan, look at where we need to build new facilities, and look at where we can enact reform for criminal justice reform. We need someone who can lead the agency, I think, before we should start appropriating money to build new facilities. And then the private prison question came up, and we did choose to rather keep a lot of people double bunked to allow them to go to the private prison in Arizona.
Yeah, we're in an emergency situation, and I have a lot of concerns about the 16-hour work shifts at El Dorado and the deep understaffing. I mean, we have, across our prison system, there are 377 positions that are open. I mean, that's a lot. And a lot of them are in El Dorado, although it's system-wide. There's lots and lots of shortfall. So we have to deal with that. And you know, I hate private prisons, actually. And the thing at the core, I mean, I was kind of surprised to find out just before the meeting that we were even considering private prisons. But the problem is we don't have any other options right now. You know, they're looking at county prisons or county jails, looking at other options, but they can't get enough beds from that. So that's why I'm hopeful that with the 15% pay raise that was passed, that we can bring more people on at El Dorado, and hopefully we can avoid having to send anybody to private prisons. But there is a crisis right now, and we have to deal with this. Now, one thing that I'm surprised about, one that I thought was an easy solution, we do have some extra space actually in our juvenile detention center in Topeka, and it is actually built to the standards of a maximum prison. So you could put prisoners there. So there was, the Secretary of Corrections wanted to move some of the female prisoners from across town at the Topeka Correctional Facility over to that facility, and needs some additional funding for staff and for programming to do that, and that was not passed. Hopefully we can pass that soon, because that is a quick one that involves in-state. We don't have to worry about out-of-state prisons or even new construction or anything. So hopefully we can do that, and hopefully if the pay raise will really help with the situation at El Dorado, because and across the system, because it's getting pretty bad right now.
Real quick, yes or no, are we expecting to see more funding requests and perhaps grants for the Department of Corrections from the State Finance Council over the summer?
I think so, because of the fact that we only grant a part of what the budget, there's still about another $10 million sitting on the table, and I assume at some point they'll come back asking for at least parts of that as they need to move more prisoners or do other things.
Which isn't the way we typically appropriate. Typically we do that through the budget process. And people they didn't have confidence in the fact that we had a secretary, and they wanted to see an overall plan, and I'm sure it will come back to Finance Council again.
Okay. Well, moving on, the latest salvos in the U.S. trade war with China could cost Kansans millions of dollars every year. I explain how in this story I filed with Cake News earlier this week.
Hong Kong.
Phi Tai came to Wichita State for a degree. She ended up staying here.
I'm very fortunate. After I graduated, and then I get to work in this university.
Helping bring other international students to WSU, each one a financial boon to the school. According to the university's website, international students pay about 50% more than local students. This holds true for Kansas State and KU as well. That adds up to more than $61 million Chinese students alone bring to the three schools in tuition, room, board, and books.
A foreign student going to an American university is an export. So if they're being discouraged in any way from coming to America to get their education, then that means we export less, which means we have less revenue.
At Kansas Global Trade Services, Karen Page spends a lot of time helping companies navigate the waters of international business. That includes education. She says for China, sending students to the U.S. for college is a big part of the culture.
They want their kids to study abroad. So they'll save for their entire lifetime, even before they have their children. So when they get married, they start immediately saving for their kids' education.
Page believes it will take more than a single warning to stop Chinese students from coming here.
I think the Chinese are more likely to listen to their government for obvious reasons. But I mean, one message will not change the entire culture.
Perhaps something more like an ongoing trade war, which Phi believes has already played a role in a 45% cut in Chinese student enrollment at WSU from fall 2017 to fall 2018.
I think started from the Trump administration came on board. All around the world, international students come to the U.S. The number has gone down quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely gone down. When I was looking over those numbers, and I spent all day pouring through the numbers on that story, all three schools that we looked at had seen drops. WSU was obviously the largest, but they also had the smallest contingent of Chinese students. KU and K-State, Chinese international students actually make up their #1 contingent of international students. And a lot of those students, speaking from personal experience as somebody who married a former international student, end up staying in the country. And we're sitting here going back to the business angle at a time when we desperately need those laborers.
Yeah, we need people. I know plenty of international students that have stayed in Wichita, particularly at least in the areas I cover in aircraft engineers and other positions like that. So yeah, and China's just so important, especially in aviation for the U.S. and Wichita as a result of that this is, you hope that this reverses, these things get ironed out, and that students still feel that they can come here and study without, fear from their own government.
Yeah. Well, we were talking earlier about some of the issues with mental health and the attendant drug problems. Sedgwick County is getting some help in fighting the battle against opioid drugs now. KMUW is reporting the Regional Forensic Science Center in Sedgwick County is getting a new machine to streamline testing of suspected opioids. The county got a $155,017 federal grant to pay for that machine. KMUW spoke with Sheriff Jeff Easter about the opioid problem, and he told them opioid abuse is growing, though meth remains the #1 concern in Sedgwick County. Overall, Easter estimated 73% of the inmates at the county jail have a drug problem. And that's something certainly that the sheriff has been working on. And I know he spent a lot of time talking with lawmakers about his concerns with drug issues. You're talking a little bit about that beforehand, Susan.
Absolutely. And meth destroys families. Opioids is a self-inflicted problem. It doesn't usually involve the whole family, but meth is a terrible problem, and it's far greater, but I'm thankful that we have the new machine to start regulating it because we know it's coming.
In terms of the opioid crisis, I do think one thing that the legislature ought to look at is the possibility of medical marijuana. We ought to study that because give people a different option for pain. When these opioids are very addictive, and a lot of people have hard times getting off them once they've had an illness or have to go to the hospital, they have severe pain and have to have an opioid, and then they can't get off it. So I think we ought to take a hard look at medical marijuana in Kansas. Our surrounding states are doing it, and I think it's time we at least take a look at it.
What does the business community think about the medical marijuana aspect? I know I've had a lot of folks ask me that, you know, if they legalize it and I need it, what does that do to my job prospects?
I think if it's medical and regulated, that would mitigate some of the impact. I will tell you just an anecdote real quick. A company from Seattle that I know it's a call center business is moving to Wichita. He specifically told me one of the reasons they were moving here was because of recreational legalization in Washington State had negatively impacted the workforce, and that was the reason they were moving here. So just something to keep in mind from an economic perspective. But I think medical, that's a little bit different, and so it'd be regulated, and I think their businesses would work around that.
I'm seeing some interested looks on our lawmakers' faces. I think you gave them something to go home and think about, and they're going to have to do it at home. I'm sorry, we are out of time. Tom, Susan, Dan, thank you so much for joining me. I have enjoyed our discussion very much. And we'd once again like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion. We'd love to continue it online. Just look for Pilar Pedraza TV or KPTS Channel 8 on Facebook and Twitter. We'd also love to hear what you think or your ideas for future shows. You can email us at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, have a great week.